Wyoming Territory, 1883. The wind had teeth that morning, dry and sharp, scraping across the high plains as Nolan Bridger rode through the frost-bitten edge of Elk Hollow. His horse's breath puffed out in clouds, and the leather saddle cracked with every shift of weight. He was just meant to pass through, had told himself as much 2 days back, when he left Rollins with nothing but a saddlebag and a quiet ache in his chest he had not named. But then he saw the smoke curling from the chimney of a half-painted cabin tucked between cottonwoods, and he heard the laughter of a child. The girl burst from the doorway like a shot from a slingshot, red scarf flapping and boots too big for her feet. She chased a chicken with a determined scowl, her dark braid bouncing behind her. A little boy stood at the top step, watching her with his thumb tucked in his mouth and eyes too old for his 5 or 6 years. Nolan slowed his horse and called out, "You got room for one more chicken, Wrangler?" The girl stopped mid-chase, straightened like a soldier, and hollered, "Mama!" The door opened, and that was when Nolan saw her. Fairen Ellis stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron, hair pinned back loose from a long morning. She had flour on her cheek and a steadiness in her eyes that stopped him cold. She looked at him like she was deciding if he was a storm or a stranger needing supper. "You lost, Cowboy?" she asked, voice even. Nolan touched the brim of his hat. "Maybe. Or maybe I just found the only warm place in this valley." Her mouth twitched, but she did not smile. "Well, I have stew on the stove and a roof that leaks. You can come in, warm up, and be on your way come morning." He should have said no. Should have ridden on. But something in the way she stood there tired but unbent, guarding her children with a wooden spoon in one hand, rooted him. "I appreciate that," he said, climbing down. Inside, the house was smaller than it looked, barely 2 rooms. The kitchen was warm from the fire, smelling of onions and meat. The boy colt clung to Fairen's skirt until she crouched to whisper something in his ear. He nodded and scurried to a corner, sitting on a quilt with a carved wooden horse. "That your husband's work?" Nolan asked, nodding toward the toy. "No," she said, "just that." Then, after a breath, "He left last spring. Said he was going for lumber in Lander. Never came back." Nolan did not ask more. He knew the kind of man who could walk away from 2 children and a woman with hands cracked from work. And he was not that man. The girl Clara sat across from him at the table and watched him like a hawk. "You got a gun?" "I do." "You ever shot anyone?" "Only when I had to." She seemed satisfied. "You can stay one night," she said, like it was her house and not her mother's. Fairen gave her daughter a look, but Nolan just smiled. "One night's all I need." But it was not. Fairen worked like the land did, steady, without complaint. She chopped wood with quiet force, milked the goat before dawn, and taught her children their letters by lamplight. Nolan helped where he could, repaired the chicken coop, patched the roof, fetched water from the creek until the pump could be fixed. One night became 2, then a week. It was the 3rd Sunday since he arrived when the snow came harder. Fairen was barefoot in the kitchen, skirts swaying as she moved to the rhythm of a tune she hummed under her breath. The children were asleep, and the stew was simmering. She did not know he was watching. Nolan stood in the doorway, arms crossed, heart thudding like a drum he could not quiet. Her hips swayed, slow and easy, her hair falling loose from its pins. She turned once, caught in the moment of her own quiet joy, and smiled to herself. That was when it hit him, not like a bullet, but like sun breaking after a long, bitter night. He was staying. He did not say it out loud, not then. Just stepped forward, slow and sure, and reached for the pot to stir beside her. "You always dance when you cook?" he asked, his voice low. Fairen gave a little laugh, startled. "Only when nobody's looking." "I was looking." She bit her lip, eyes meeting his. "And what did you see?" "Something worth staying for." The words hung there, warm and real. She did not answer right away, just searched his face like she was trying to find the lie. But Nolan had no lies left in him. That night, he sat with Colt on his knee, whittling a new horse. Clara leaned against his shoulder, half asleep. Fairen watched from across the room, arms folded, eyes soft. He was not a stranger anymore, and he was not leaving. The February sun rose pale and slow over Elk Hollow, casting long shadows on the snow-crusted earth. Nolan was already outside, splitting logs behind the barn, when Fairen stepped onto the porch. She carried a tin basin of wash water, steam curling from the surface into the cold morning air. Her boots crunched across the frozen ground as she crossed to the line strung between two cottonwoods. "You're up early," she said, pinning a damp shirt to the wire. "Didn't sleep much," Nolan replied, setting another log on the chopping block. "Dreams kept pulling me back to places I'd rather forget." Fairen paused, clothespin between her fingers. "You got folks somewhere?" He shook his head. "Had a brother once. Killed in Missouri. Rest weren't ever much to talk about." She studied him a moment, then turned back to the laundry. "Well, you've got us now." The words fell quiet between them, like snow gathering on fence posts. Nolan didn't answer, just split another log, the crack echoing into the trees. Later that day, Clara sat cross-legged by the hearth, reading aloud from a worn primer. Fairen stood behind her daughter, guiding her finger along the words. Colt slept in the cradle Nolan had fixed with a strip of rawhide and a good nail, his breathing soft and steady. "I never thought I'd teach letters," Fairen said, brushing a lock of hair from Clara's brow. "Didn't finish my own schooling. Had to stop after my stepfather remarried. His new wife didn't see the use of it." "You're making up for it now," Nolan said, watching the girl sound out each word with quiet determination. Fairen turned from the fire. "You ever read for more than need?" He nodded. "Used to keep a small book of psalms in my coat. Read at nights when I was riding fence for the mine outfit near Medicine Bow. Not for the scripture, just the rhythm of the words." Her gaze lingered. "I've never heard a man say that. I've never had reason to." That night, after the children were in bed, Fairen sat at the table, mending one of Colt's shirts. The oil lamp flickered, casting her face in soft gold. Nolan worked quietly beside her, carving a slingshot from a branch Clara had brought him. "You planning to stay through spring?" she asked without looking up. "I hadn't planned that far ahead." She tied off her thread, then met his eyes. "I can't offer much. No promises, no land. Just this house, and the work that comes with it." "I didn't come for land," he said. "And I don't need promises." Fairen folded the little shirt, smoothing the sleeves. "Then why are you still here?" Nolan set down the slingshot. "Because when I watch you move through this house, when I see the way you keep it going with just your hands and your will, I want to be part of that. I want to carry some of it." She didn't flinch, didn't look away. "I don't know how to lean on someone. You don't have to. Just let me stand beside you." The wind howled against the walls as she reached across the table, fingers brushing his. Calloused met calloused. Neither of them moved away. In the days that followed, the house grew quieter in a different way, not from silence, but from understanding. Nolan taught Clara how to track rabbit prints in the snow, and she showed him how to braid twine for snares. Fairen let him take over the harnessing of the mule, and he didn't complain when the beast kicked at his shin. One afternoon, while Colt napped and Clara practiced letters on a slate, Fairen stepped out to the shed. Nolan was inside, hanging strips of jerky from a rafter. "You built something steady here," he said as she entered. "I built something that wouldn't fall. That's not the same." He looked at her, his face open in a way she hadn't seen in any man since before her first child was born. She didn't answer right away, just walked to the workbench and picked up a hammer, running her thumb along the handle. "I used to think if I stopped moving, I'd break apart. But lately, I don't feel like I'm running anymore." Nolan stepped closer, slow and sure. "Then maybe it's time to let something grow." She looked up, eyes steady. "You asking me to build something with you?" "I'm saying I've got hands ready for it. If you want them." Fairen didn't smile, she didn't need to. She just leaned in, resting her forehead against his chest, and let out a breath she'd been holding for years. Outside, the snow began to melt in slow drips from the eaves, and the wind softened around the edges. Inside, two people stood in a quiet shed, not speaking, not needing to, both knowing that something finally had begun. By the first thaw, the creek behind the cabin ran fast and clear, carrying broken twigs and bits of ice down from the higher ground. Nolan stood at its edge one morning, trousers rolled to his knees, hauling stones from the bank to shore up the muddy path that led toward the barn. His hands were raw from the cold water, but he worked slow and steady, the way he always did when his thoughts were full. Fairen came down the slope with a basket slung on her hip, her shawl pulled snug. She stopped a few paces from him, watching as he wedged another flat rock into place. "You planning to fix the whole world one stone at a time?" she asked. He tilted his head toward her. "Just trying to keep your boots dry." She set the basket down and knelt beside him, brushing her fingers across the edge of a stone he'd just placed. You always this particular? When there's something worth doing right. She didn't look at him, but her mouth pulled into a line that wasn't quite a smile. I've never met a man who stayed after the hard part showed up. I've never been much good at leaving. She picked up a smaller rock, fitted into a gap between two larger ones. Colt's been talking in his sleep again. Nolan straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers. Bad dreams. Same ones every night. He calls out for someone, but I can't tell who. She stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. He never did that before. I'll sit with him next time it happens. She looked at him then, fully. You do that? Of course I would. They walked back together through the warming light, past the bare-limbed cottonwoods, their branches dripping with melt. At the cabin, Clara stood on a stool near the stove, stirring something in the kettle with a wooden spoon too big for her hand. She glanced up when they entered. I didn't burn it, she said, proud. Fairen leaned down to check. You did fine. Keep stirring, or it'll catch at the bottom. Clara nodded, focused again. Nolan stood by the door, watching the quiet rhythm of it all. The way Fairen's hand brushed her daughter's back in passing. The way the girl leaned into it, without thinking. That night, when the wind picked up again and the moon rose thin above the ridge, Colt woke crying. Nolan sat beside the bed before Fairen could rise, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. It's all right, he said softly. I'm here. The boy blinked up at him, face damp. I dreamt I was in the woods. Mama got lost. You're not in the woods now, Nolan said. And your mama's right in the next room. Colt curled beneath the quilt, small fingers clutching his carved horse. Will you stay till morning? I'll stay as long as you need. In the days that followed, Fairen watched Nolan more closely, not with suspicion, but with a quiet kind of curiosity. One afternoon, as they shelled beans on the porch, she spoke without looking up. You never asked me questions. Not about before. Not about what happened when he left. Nolan didn't pause in his work. You'd tell me if you wanted me to know. She set a split pot in the bowl. I was 17 when I married him. My mother pushed it. Said he had land and a mule. That was enough. You were barely more than a girl. I thought that was the way of it. He wasn't cruel. Just empty. Like a house with no fire in it. Nolan let that sit a while. Then, you ever think of leaving? Once. She looked out toward the ridge. I packed food, took the children, made it as far as the edge of the canyon. But Clara cried for her doll, and Colt wouldn't stop fussing. I sat on a rock and thought, where would we even go? He didn't try to answer, just reached out and took her hand, stilling her fingers in the bowl. You don't have to go anywhere anymore. Fairen's hand trembled once, then stilled. That evening, she found him in the barn, checking the harness straps. The lantern flickered low. She leaned against the post, watching him adjust a buckle with care. I've been thinking, she said. He didn't turn. About what you said. About building something. He turned then, slowly, eyes clear. I don't know what that looks like yet, she continued. But I know I want to try. Nolan stepped toward her, but stopped just short. You sure? I'm not scared of work. I'm scared of not trying. He reached for her, gently, like he was afraid she'd vanish if he moved too fast. She went to him, resting her head against his chest, her breath hitching once. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But the space between them was gone. Outside, the wind softened. The scent of thawed earth rose from the fields. And in the hush of the barn, they stood together, two people who'd lived through the hard parts, ready at last to begin something they could both hold. By late March, the thaw had given way to mud, and the hollow breathed again soft. Damp earth pressed under every boot step, and the trees budded with a cautious green. Nolan had taken to trimming fence posts along the north edge of the pasture, while Fairen readied the garden beds beside the house, clearing the dead stalks from last year's beans and peas. One morning, as the sun lifted clear over the ridge and warmed the dew off the roof shingles, Fairen stood with her hands on her hips, surveying a patch of bare soil. I'm thinking of putting in carrots, she said. Nolan leaned on the spade, his shirt damp at the collar. You ever try onions in that strip by the window? Soil stays rich there. She squinted toward the spot and nodded. Could be. Never thought to use it for anything but herbs. He set the spade aside. I can turn it for you after supper. Fairen brushed her hair back with the heel of her hand. You don't have to do everything. I know. Doesn't mean I mind. She didn't answer, but her eyes held his a little longer than usual before she turned back to the rows. That afternoon, Fairen took Clara and Colt into town for flour and vinegar, leaving Nolan to mend the latch on the barn door. He finished by mid-afternoon and paced the edge of the porch until the wagon came into view, cresting the rise with its wheels flinging mud. As they pulled near, Clara waved her bonnet high. "Mama, let me pick the color thread for my new dress." Fairen guided the reins with one hand, the other steady on Colt's shoulder beside her. Nolan caught the reins as she drew the wagon to a stop. "Everything goes smooth." "Mostly," Fairen said. Storekeeper's wife said the teacher's quitting at the end of the season. No one wants to take her place. Nolan helped Colt down and gave Clara a lift from the seat. "You thinking of stepping in?" Fairen climbed down last, her boots landing square in the mud. "I can read and write, but I'm no teacher. Besides, I've got enough to tend here." Colt tugged her skirt. "Can I show Nolan the marbles?" Fairen nodded. "Go on, but don't lose them in the grass." As the children ran ahead, Fairen pulled a small tin from the satchel and handed it to Nolan. "Pick this up for you." Storekeeper had a few left. He opened it to find oil for his saddle and a stub of beeswax. "That's thoughtful. You've earned it." Her voice was quiet. "You've stayed." Nolan tucked the tin under his arm. "I meant what I said." She exhaled, folding her arms. "I know you did. I didn't expect to believe it." That evening, after the children were put to bed, Fairen stepped onto the porch with a shawl around her shoulders and 2 cups of coffee. Nolan was already there, seated on the top step, his legs stretched out in front of him. She handed him a cup and sat beside him. "You see that star just above the ridge?" she asked. He followed her gaze. "The bright one. That's the first one Clara learned to find. She used to call it hers. Said it watched over her. She's got your stubborn streak." Fairen sipped from her cup. "She'll need it." They sat in silence a while, the wind soft and cool, carrying the scent of turned soil and pine. Then Nolan set his cup down and reached into his shirt pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper. "I picked this up in town last week," he said, handing it to her. She unfolded it slowly. It was a land claim form, blank, but ready. "I've been thinking about putting my name on something," he said. "Not just for me. For all of us." Fairen's fingers trembled slightly as she folded the paper again. "You'd stay here? File for land in Elk Hollow. If you'll have me." She looked at him, not startled, not afraid. Just quiet, measuring. "I never thought I'd want to build something again," she said. "But I look at you with the children. I see what this place could be with your name on it, too. And I start to hope." Nolan reached over, gently taking her hand. "Then let's do it. Together." She didn't let go. Inside, the lantern burned low in the window, casting a soft glow across the yard. The creek sang somewhere beyond the barn, and the stars above the ridge blinked steady and sure. They sat there until the coffee cooled and the night deepened, their hands twined. The future not a question anymore, but a promise. The morning she signed the land claim, Fairen wore a blue wool dress Nolan hadn't seen before. It had a frayed cuff and one missing button, but she'd brushed the dust from it and pinned her hair with a care that didn't go unnoticed. She didn't speak much on the wagon ride into town, and Nolan didn't press her. Some things settled deeper than words. At the land office, she wrote her name with a firm hand, her jaw set like she was driving fence posts into dry ground. Nolan signed beside her, and when the clerk folded the paper and handed it back, her fingers lingered on the edge as though holding proof that something long hoped for had finally taken shape. Outside, she stood with the claim in her coat pocket, eyes moving over the town like she was seeing it different than before. The same buildings, same dusty street, but now with anchors beneath her feet. "I didn't think I'd feel anything," she said. Nolan adjusted his hat against the wind. "And do you?" She glanced at him, her voice quiet. "Like I just opened a door I didn't know I had the key to." They stopped at the blacksmith's after to ask about a new blade for the broken plow, and Fairen nodded toward a curved bench out front. "My mother used to sit just like that when we came to town, back straight, hands folded, pretending she wasn't waiting." Nolan looked at the empty seat. "Waiting for what?" "For my stepfather to come out of the saloon and remember she existed." He said nothing, just reached for her hand. She let him take it. Back home, the cabin had begun to carry a weight that wasn't heavy, just rooted. The children knew the rhythm of Nolan's boots across the porch, the sound of his whistle when he came in from the pasture. Clara had taken to scribbling her name on everything scraps of paper, the inside cover of an old almanac, as though claiming space for herself in a world that finally felt steady. Colt slept longer now, curling against his quilt with the carved horse tucked beneath his chin. One evening, Fairen brought out a tin box wrapped in cloth. She set it on the table, glancing toward Clara and Colt, who were bent over a puzzle by the fire. "I want to show you something," she said. Nolan waited as she opened the lid and pulled out a bundle of folded fabric, worn but carefully kept. She unwrapped it to reveal a small quilt square, each piece stitched from scraps of dresses, shirts, and flour sacks. "My grandmother started this before I was born. Said every woman in our line should add her own square." He looked at the stitches, some tight, some uneven, each one different. "I haven't added mine yet," Fairen said. "Didn't feel right before. And now," she laid a finger on one empty corner, "now I think I'd like to sew too." Nolan touched the edge of the fabric. "What would you put in yours?" She considered. "A piece of that red shirt you tore mending the gate. And maybe the hem from Clara's old dress. Something from here. From now." That night, after the children were in bed, she stood at the wash basin, brushing out her hair. Nolan watched her from the doorway. "I've been thinking," he said. "We've built something solid here, but I'd like to make it official." She turned. "You already signed the claim. I'm not talking about land." She set the brush down. "You asking me to marry you? I'm saying I want to wake up beside you every morning. Not just stay. Build. Share the quiet. Share the years." Fairen stepped toward him, bare feet silent on the floor. "I've never worn a ring. Doesn't have to be gold. Just has to be ours." Her hand found his. "Then yes." They married at the edge of the field, beneath the cottonwoods, just as the first wildflowers came up. Clara gathered the blooms into a bunch and tied it with a strip of muslin. Colt wore a shirt Nolan had sewn a patch onto the week before. They stood with only the circuit rider preacher and the wind as witness, and when it was done, Fairen leaned into Nolan, her head tucked beneath his chin. That summer, the garden gave more than they expected: beans in neat rows, carrots thick in the soil, onions curling up proud and green. Clara helped with the harvest, and Colt chased grasshoppers through the stalks. Nolan built a small shelf for Fairen's sewing and carved her a wooden thimble holder. She sewed her square into the quilt, then a second one beside it, stitched with a corner of his shirt and a scrap of her daughter's old hem. Evenings came slow and gold. They sat on the porch with coffee in hand, watching the shadows stretch long across their land. Sometimes Nolan read aloud from a book of poetry he'd found in town. Sometimes Fairen just leaned against him, her hand resting on his knee, quiet and content. Years passed, but the rhythm held, planting, mending, growing. The cabin stood through storms and sun, its walls filled with laughter, with stitched quilts and drying herbs, with the soft scuffle of children's feet and the low hum of two voices joined in a life made by hand. And always, when the stars rose just above the ridge, Fairen would find that same one Clara once claimed as hers and whisper to Nolan, "Still watching." And he'd answer, "So am I."